Homeschool Moms Unfiltered Book Club. We are so glad you're here. My name is Megan, and my bookworm co-host is...
Hey, I'm Amanda.
All right, so you might be thinking, I am not prepared for book club. How did I end up here, right? Don't leave. It's fine. We are the most relaxed book club you'll pretty much ever find. You don't even have to read the books if you don't want to. Just tune in, and we will share the highlights with you.
It's true. If you want to bring your wine, that's fine. But really, you're welcome to read along. And it certainly isn't a must, right? Like you're welcome to, it's not required. Today, we're kicking off a new book called The Homeschooling Starter Guide, How to Create and Adapt the Best Education Action Plan for Your Needs by Dr. Gina M. So it's that thing, right? We've had explosive growth in the homeschool community. There's so many new people coming into homeschooling that we're pretty excited to be reading a book that is going to just kind of give some foundational information on topics like schooling styles, staying on track, standards and requirements, inclusive action plans. We know that we're a little ways into it, right? And we both came to it in different ways. But I think this book will be really useful for a lot of these people who are coming in. Either it's their first year or they're thinking about doing it and they're just a little like, what should I do? This is nice, right? I've seen a lot of different books. There are a lot of options out there, but this one is little. It's manageable for even the parents with young kids, right? I bought one. I don't even remember why I bought it, but there was people had recommended it because of a specific section or something. I bought that sucker. It could have been a brick. And I'm like, who has time, right? Who has time?
I'm doesn't feel at all overwhelming. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we broke down the chapters for this. We're only 3 episodes and we're done with this book because it's a quick and easy read, but there's a lot of meat to it at the same time, which is really good. And I always like it when books are broken down like this. There's a lot of white space in this book, which I feel like, I don't know, it just helps me track when I'm reading. It's a really friendly thing. It makes me feel happy when I look at pages like that. So today we'll be discussing the introduction and chapters 1, 2, and 3. And I would love to kick us off with an excerpt from chapter 1 because I felt like it set a really great tone for the book. So the very beginning of chapter 1, page 1 says, why should you homeschool? It says there are so many reasons homeschooling is beneficial for children and teens, including increased academic success, increased positive social behaviors, and increased civic engagement later on in life. And these are based on studies. Now, she doesn't tell us what studies they are here necessarily. I would have loved a footnote as well, but she says it. Homeschooling also allows students to learn real-world skills right away instead of waiting until after they graduate from high school or go on to college. Many homeschooled students learn to prepare meals, do their own laundry, and assist parents or siblings with household tasks early on. Homeschooling parents themselves report many benefits of home learning for their families, including an increased intrinsic motivation to learn, improved feelings of self-confidence and self-esteem in their children, and family freedom of schedule. And those last 3 lines I loved about intrinsic motivation, self-confidence, and family freedom. Yes, yes, yes. So that is the beginning of chapter 1, but let's kick off with our notes for the week. What is your first book note, Amanda?
Well, it's along the lines of what you just did, right? So the intro is, it's a really soft, gentle intro, and it's quick and easy to read. For me, at the very end of the introduction section, there's a quote. It says, homeschooling has many benefits, and homeschool graduates have demonstrated incredible academic, social, and community-based success. And then it goes on to what that rolls into the first page that you just read. And it's great. I love it, but there's nothing with stats or footnotes, showing the sources that back that up. And I know they're there. I know she kind of brings the receipts, but she doesn't put it in the easiest way to find. And I think for the people who are picking this up and on the fence about how to get started or to do it, it would have been helpful if those were more like just obvious. I even went in the back. There is a section in the back that has resources or references, and it's not actually back there either. So I was just a little disappointed that it was not like clearly this is where those stats are coming from to help support people who are just trying to get going. But it's a small thing, right? I like what it says. I just wish considering this is for newbies coming in, I wish it was a little bit more clear where she was getting this information. You know, anyone can say, this is amazing because blah, 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 you know, like show why.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, she's got 7 pages of references there, but they don't track back to each individual aspect of the book. And that just that little connection, maybe in the second revision, the revised edition, we can we'll write to Dr. Gina M. Riley and be like, could you just link them together for those of us that are very detail oriented? That would be great. Thank you.
Yeah.
The note that I made in the beginning section here is the fact that she homeschooled in the state of New York. So depending on where you're listening from, or if you're new to homeschooling altogether, and if you're in New York, I really don't mean to be a Debbie Downer, I swear. But New York is one of the most regulated states to homeschool in. It is, there's a map online about like low regulation, mid, and then high regulation in New York, Pennsylvania, some of the New England states are heavy regulation states. There's just more interaction between you and the school system and things like that. It's not a bad thing, but I do see little tinges of her experience in the book where she's like, and this must happen. And I was like, no, it must not. Like it, I mean, you can, but maybe for her, it was a must because of where she homeschooled. So if you're reading this and you live in Texas, none of the musts apply to you. I will tell you that right now, right? If you're in Florida and you're homeschooling through Florida Unschooled umbrella, none of this applies to you, right? And so none of those must statements are for you. She's homeschooling in a very different environment than many of us are in low regulation states. So just kind of throwing that out there as a blanket statement because it might come back again in future topics. And then I also had a note on page 3 where she talks about the fact that it's important. It says parents choose homeschooling for a myriad of reasons. In the 1980s and 1990s, religious beliefs were the number one reason parents decided to homeschool their children. But that's not necessarily the case anymore. There's still plenty of people homeschooling for religious reasons, right? They don't want their kids indoctrinated in the public school system. There's an audio on Instagram that's it's like, I'm too busy teaching your children how to read to indoctrinate them. Like, and it's like, it's set to like a classic jingle, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, no, I don't even have time to get done my actual job, let alone indoctrinate them into something else. Right. But that's not the case anymore. So according to 2017 study, which again, pre-pandemic, so everything changed after the pandemic. But according to the National Center for Education Statistics, the top 3 motivations for homeschooling included concerns about a child's environment, school environment, dissatisfaction with academic instruction at school, and a desire for more faith-based education. So that's certainly still in there. But we talked about this in our very first episode as far as things to do when you decide you want to start homeschooling is to make a list of your whys, right? Why are you homeschooling? It doesn't have to be anything super formal. I threw mine together really quick and just made some notes, right? But I feel like having that as something that you can bounce everything off of, right? Like, is what I'm doing, are the decisions that I'm making aligned with my whys? Or am I getting distracted because somebody in a Facebook group said this program is amazing, or because I can't sleep at night because I'm really nervous because my mother-in-law keeps planting seeds in my head about the fact that, you know, I'm not doing enough, or, you know, I'm comparing my kids to someone else's kid on social media who's doing X, Y, Z and my kid isn't, right? You can continuously go back to that list of whys, right? So I'll give you mine really quick, just as an idea. And I don't expect yours to look like mine, right? Everybody will have their own, right? But mine are, I dislike feeling like I've been shot out of a cannon and starting every day that way, right? And rushing my kids out of the house and then getting them home and rushing them through homework and rushing them through dinner because they need to be in bed by a certain time because they have to be up way too early the next day to get to do it all over again, right? Like, when do they get to be kids? Where's the outdoor time? Where's the family time? It's all missing. Because a one size fits all does not work for most aspects of life, and definitely not in education. Because I am not naive enough to think that hunkering under your desk with your hands over your head is going to stop the spray of bullets from an automatic weapon. Because I love spending time with my kids and I truly missed them when they were in school. It was when we would have a vacation, I would be devastated when they would go back to school afterwards. I missed them so much. Because I wanted my kids to learn about the world from exploring it, not reading it in textbooks. Because sibling bonds for me were more important than loose acquaintance friendships from school. And because I didn't use so much of my ridiculously expensive education, and I didn't want to repeat the same process just because that's the way it's quote unquote done. So make your list, right? Sit down. I know it seems silly, but sit down and write it down, because when you're having those really tough days, to be able to go back and be like, am I fulfilling the things that I hope to do as a homeschooler? If yes, great. You've just reinforced your own belief system and given yourself a little confidence boost. And if not, oh, have I gotten off track because I got distracted by something somebody else said? And if it doesn't align with the reasons that I'm homeschooling, how can I course correct? Right. But having that list is super duper helpful in my mind.
Yeah. And I'm going to say, I don't think your list is your list, and that's totally fine, but it does not have to be that long and that well thought out and that many points. Yeah. Your list can be super simple. If I had to really say what started it for us, it was really simple. I wanted two things. I wanted a rigorous academic education, and I wanted differentiated learning. And we tried two different schools, and one of them was not as rigorous as I wanted, but they were great at differentiated learning. And the other one was a bit more rigorous, but they were terrible. They promised differentiated learning, and I gave them 2 years to try to get their shit together, and they just could not make it happen. And so I was homeschooling all of the differentiated learning that I wanted.
Right.
And then we
While
were
paying for
and then we were, like fighting over those crap that the school wanted us to submit and do and turn in. And he hated their ELA program, and he hated their math program, and they weren't covering very much of science, and they weren't doing any social studies. And so I'm like, well, I'm doing all of these things already, and he's doing double ELA and math of stuff that he already knows, and he doesn't need it. And like, this is stupid. Like, this is stupid, and that's all it took for us. Those 2 points. I wanted rigorous academic education, and I wanted differentiated learning. And we, it really came down to like, there might be this one school, the feedback was there's this one school that might be able to do that for us. It's a long application process. It's more expensive than a lot of universities. Are we willing to go that route right now? Let's try this other thing first. And I'm so thankful that we did, right? It's worked out really well for us. But your list doesn't have, your list can be really simple. Whatever it is for you that was your priority, what you want to make sure you're not losing sight of as you do this. And it can change, it can change. It probably will change. It'd be a little weird if it didn't change between kindergarten and 6th grade, hopefully your kids don't need the same thing in 6th grade that they did in kindergarten. Like, high level, sure, but there are going to be some changes, I hope. Yeah. They need to be able to go to the bathroom whenever they want. Like, well, yes, but...
Yeah, but in public school, they can't do that ever, right? Even in high school, they still have to ask permission to go to the bathroom. And
but at least funny. You get to move between classes, right? Like, you might be a little late, but you can go to the bathroom then, as opposed to in kindergarten where you just have to sit in one classroom and wait for the dedicated potty breaks. One school we looked at, they were like, oh no, like, we have times, and all the students line up and they all go to the bathroom and then wash their hands and then sit down. And it's like a potty parade at certain times of the day, and that's it. I was like, oh, I don't know about that.
I mean, yeah, that teaches kids to listen to their body really, really well.
I don't see UTIs at all in our future, right?
No, right? Oh my gosh, I'm telling you. I mean, it was interesting. I mean, we've talked about it before. We read that book in our other book club called How to Raise an Adult. And they talked about how unprepared for the real world these college kids are. And I'm like, yeah, but at the same time, like, what a disservice. They've literally come from an environment where they cannot pee without permission. And then they've been dropped off on a college campus and expected to live independently. And I'm like, you literally weren't allowed to pee without asking permission 3 months ago. And now this is the world. Like, of course they're not prepared, right? There was no scaling down of that system throughout. It was just so bananas, but I digress.
Yeah. All right. So I think I have the next comment. We're probably fairly close on these comments, but I'll go ahead and start. So for me, there's a paragraph that I wanted to read. And she says, there are, however, challenges to the homeschool learning environment. Homeschoolers don't have immediate access to peers within a classroom structure, so social gatherings may sometimes have to be intentionally planned. Homeschoolers also may not have the benefit of having a gymnasium space to engage in athletic activities or music, or art rooms to engage in creative activities. That leaves the creation of these spaces to the parent, with some help from their child. In a home learning environment, the parent is the facilitator of the child's education. and therefore has a lot more responsibility than most parents do, because they have to manage not only their child's well-being, but also their child's education. And for me, I just think it's true, right? And I feel like so often we gloss over it. And I think in part it's because, we're so often having to justify why we homeschool. And we kind of worry that if we complain about our struggles, you know, the immediate answer is, well, just put them back in school.
Right. Or you
Just send them to
chose this.
school. Yeah, you
This
chose
is your
this, or just send them
choice.
to school, And so I feel like as homeschooling parents, sometimes we're not honest with some of the struggles or some of the cons in the pro-con list, because we know that they kind of come back to bite us in the ass in an unequally fair way, kind of thing. And so I do think it's important to be honest and to create space for commiseration too, right? It's not always easy. Worth it? Absolutely not always easy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I completely agree. But at the same time, right? So this episode comes out on Thursday. We launch a topic episode every week on Tuesday, and then book club is Thursday. At the same time, our topic episode for this week was dealing with homeschool backlash, right? When people say like, why would you do this? Whatever. And I think that paragraph that you just read, I had highlighted that last part about being not only the facilitator of education, but then responsible for their well-being and all this stuff, right? You take on a lot as a homeschool parent. And so for me, that's another way of kind of shutting down the homeschool naysayers or the doubters in some way too, right? Like if I wasn't going to do this well, I wouldn't be doing it, because it's a lot of work, right? And it's a big responsibility. And we do feel like the weight is all on it. I mean, I think most homeschool parents feel this weight of like, what if I screw this up or whatever, right? Like it's all on me. And so it's like, why do you think I would take that on if I wasn't committed to doing the very best that I possibly could for my kids? When there's an easy button where they hop on a bus at the end of the driveway and show up at 3:00 in the afternoon, and I can go to Orange Theory during the day and have lunch with my girlfriends, right? Like, so I feel like in a way too, yes, I totally agree with what you're saying. And then also it's another one of those kind of like defenses to people challenging your homeschooling and being like, oh yeah, I took on all this extra work because I was bored, or I thought it would just be like a fun hobby. Like, no, I'm fully committed to giving my kid an amazing, well-rounded education. So the end, right?
Yeah, for sure.
I liked that part too. On page 5.
Yeah, you have it. No, I was just going to say, you have a note here on page 5, and I totally didn't take this away from that section. I even went back and reread it to see, because like I'm like, oh, I didn't highlight that. Like, let me look. So I'm curious. Let's talk.
Well, it's my unschooling way, right? Mm-hmm. So she's talking about the time commitment. And so she says here, so the previous sentence, right, says homeschooling does take a rather large time commitment. If a family decides to engage in more formal methods of homeschooling, they must choose and or purchase a curriculum and plan individualized lessons. They must grade and comment on papers and tests. And I'm like, there's really very few musts, right? Like even if you want a formal method of education, you can still assess kids without testing and things like that. Like, so I feel like you can still have conversations to assess learning and things like that. Like,
but do you feel like that's formal?
I don't know. In my mind, I feel like it could be, right? But I don't do that. So in your in your mind, you're like, it's not formal enough for me, right? But
well, I mean, yeah, like we have an aggressive academic way of doing it, but we don't do a lot of graded assignments and we don't do a lot of assessment testing. But at the same time, I wouldn't say that we're especially formal, because we specifically choose not to do those things. And I feel like those are a necessary component of a formal education.
There you go. I dislike the word must in relationship to a lot of things homeschooling related.
I hadn't noticed.
Because I'm like, the whole thing of homeschooling is the freedom to do what works well for your kid. Mm-hmm. And so you can formally homeschool your kid. You can unschool your kid. You can, Waldorf, collect leaves and flowers, like whatever the hell you want to do. You can do what works well for your kid. And there's very few musts about how you have to do that, even in my mind, within a system, right? Mm-hmm. So like I've been challenged on the fact that my unschoolers take especially my 12-year-old, takes quite a few formal classes, right? And people are like, is that unschooling? It is unschooling because it's his choice and it's his educational path, right? And so even within a system, whether it's formal, Waldorf, Montessori, whatever, unschooling, there's still very few musts, because it's not like the Montessori police are going to show up at your house and be like, you didn't do it no, I must not do anything, right? Like I can, you must provide, food and shelter and a safe environment for your kids and things like that. But beyond that, there's very few musts that actually come into things. So I was just like, meh. And I was just thinking, like, yeah, she's a New York homeschooler. There are more musts there. There really are. In my world, there's very few. Everything is up for discussion. This isn't working for us. Why isn't it working? Well, let's figure out a different way to do it then, right? So there's very few things that, and even if you're in a high regulation state, there's still ways that you can make things work for you. I would not sacrifice my kids' happiness or their learning path or anything like that for a I'd figure out how to meet the regulation another way. So very few musts. Don't feel
and that's
like
it. I mean, I think it's about just vocabulary and how we define things, right? And that's going to be different for every person. And for me, the same. Like I think there are lots of different ways to do it. And I do think that you can have a rigorous academic curriculum that doesn't have a lot of the formal grading and testing, right? There, you can use alternative ways to assess. That's why they're called alternative assessments. But for me, if you're using an alternative assessment, then that inevitably means you aren't using a formal method, right? So, but I mean, we're like splitting hairs at this point. So, yeah.
But I think still important for people to know, because like if you're new, you might read this and be like, oh, I have to do this thing. You don't have to.
No, that like if you want to do this, it involves this. Like if you are identifying yourself as this, it will involve these things, but there's nothing that says you have to do it that way. And, if you have a kid who like loves a test, they love to have the paper and they love to fill it out and they love to crush it and they love the A or the smiley face or whatever, like go on with your bad self, right? That's what homeschooling is about. If that's what your kid loves, like give it to them. Don't be like, no, you cannot get a smiley face on your paper because we don't test, right? Like, that's a silly thing to deny your child. Like, no, nope. Like, but it's not necessary.
Yeah.
All right. So I have the next one. Let me get to the page. Okay. So page 7, this section is called socialization. Obviously, she's going to address socialization. The quote specifically says, some researchers have even postulated that homeschoolers may be better socialized than their schooled peers because of more positive, age-mixed, and real-world interactions.
Would you look at that?
Yeah. And so if you want to know more about this and you just want to do a quick, easy Google search, the keywords you're going to probably use are vertical and horizontal socialization. And I actually mentioned that in the episode we did earlier this week when we were talking about socialization. But those are the terms that they have done a lot of studies on and around, where they're looking at and the significance of vertical, which is that age mixed of all ages, and horizontal socialization, which is like all students of the same age because you turned 5, but you haven't turned 6 between these months, kind of thing. All right. So I have the next comment as well. So on page 8, the section title is resources. And she's talking about how costly it can be. And the quote is specifically, that is why it's important to create a budget and stick to it for home learning. And I have, I have mixed feelings about that, right? I do think that generally speaking, it is important for the vast majority of people to have some type of budget, right? Because the fact of the matter is you're homeschooling for a good cause, right? This is not, well, I feel good, like I want to environmental change or animal rights, whatever. Like, these are your kids. And when it's your kids, it is so easy to just keep writing checks, even if there's not any money in the bank account. For me, it kind of rang true the same for us. Like when we were doing fertility treatments, right? I knew some people who were like, we're just going to keep going. We're going to go until we have another child. And one of the best pieces of advice that I got was that, your emotions get involved and it can really become an issue of bankrupting yourself, and how far will you go? And it's kind of like gambling. And it is with fertility treatments every cycle, like, well, we have this percentage chance. We have this percentage chance. And so in our family, we did set a dollar amount, and it was a high dollar amount, but we set it and said, when we hit this, we're done. We're going to accept what's happened, and that'll be the end of it. And I do think that, in a lot of ways that can be useful. Now, that said, I don't think you have to have a strict budget that you stick to, right? So for us, when we decided to go full homeschooling, our other choice I had mentioned before was a very expensive private school. So we had decided that our rule of thumb would be that we would happily spend up to half of the tuition of the private school to pay for whatever extra classes, travel, museum passes, zoo passes and SeaWorld passes, whatever. We didn't do that, but, to give you an example of the things, just all of the things that we might do. And that if we found we were consistently getting to a point where we wanted to exceed that amount, we would revisit. We would, do we still want to homeschool? Do we want to actually do the private school? Do we want to, increase our budget? Where is that increase going to come from? And just being aware of that. And I do think, for the vast majority of us, we have to be aware of exactly how much, of generally how much we're spending, not exactly how much we're spending. I don't want anyone to tell me exactly how much I'm spending on educational and homeschool stuff.
I'll fall over. I
Yeah.
know. I'm like, oh my gosh. I know. It's funny too, because like you mentioned about tuition, right? So like, my daughter this year, I just paid her last tuition college payment, and then she's going to take a break from college. And we're going to do some traveling and whatever. And so the number of times I have said, well, I won't be paying tuition anymore. And my husband's like, there's only so many times you can, well, I won't be paying tuition anymore. He's like, tuition wasn't that much. Like, I mean, it was a hefty amount. Don't get me wrong. Like it was when I would open it every month, every semester, I'd be like, but he's like, you've spent the tuition bill like 17 times saying I won't be paying tuition anymore in your head. And I'm like, okay, yeah, I got that. So
guilty as charged. Okay.
Like, just don't tell me how much. There's that thing that I see sometimes online that's like, my husband is married to two women. One is you only live once, and the other one is we have to save for the future, and he never knows which one he's dealing with, And I'm like, okay, good point.
Yeah. All right. So before we dive into the next chapter, we want to remind you or let you know that we have easy links to all of the things we talk about, including the books that we use for book club, in our show notes. So if you weren't super familiar with that or super familiar with podcasts and how that works, the show notes they're basically just the summary or the transcript of each individual podcast, wherever you listen or watch. And because we have links, some of them, definitely not all of them, but some of them are affiliate links. So if you would like to financially support us, but Patreon or Buy Me a Coffee is a little bit out of your budget right now, we totally get it. We were just literally talking about budget. We get it. You can click on our product links in those notes, right? It's a quick, easy, absolutely no cost to you way of helping us cover some of the expenses with creating and publishing this podcast. So yeah, it's a win-win. Check out check out the links.
Yes, we would love that. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. So chapter 2 is called Create the Best Learning Environment for Your Home. And so I've got the first note here on chapter 12, which I loved. And it talks about the fact that the learning environment can and should extend outside the four walls of your home or apartment, right? So to your point, we've talked about it before, Amanda, like, the homeschooled kids are just like sitting home alone, so sad and lonely, right? And we submitted, we don't know if we've gotten in yet, but we submitted a proposal for South by Southwest for 2025. And that was our kind of the basis of our topic, was that homeschooling is a misnomer, right? People think that we sit home all day alone in, classrooms with chalkboards on the wall and desks facing forward and all of that. It couldn't be further from the truth. So just remember, if you're new to homeschooling, it doesn't have to, and I would say shouldn't, look anything like public school, right? You are free to blow up the entire construct of education and figure out what works best for you, right? And so you do not have to kind of take the foundation that's there and then tweak it a little bit. You can start from a blank piece of paper, because the people who designed the public school system don't know your kid, don't have your kid's best interest in mind, didn't know much more about education than it wasn't experienced teachers who built the public school system. Let's just say that, right? It was definitely not. So you are not glued to that methodology.
Yeah. And, just piggybacking off of that, kind of the very next sentence says, because we lived in such a small space, the world became our classroom, as did the people inside that world. Mm-hmm. We knew our grocer, the bank teller, our postman, and our repair people, and we knew all of them well. And my note was, look, that's fine. If that's what you want to do and that's how you want to do it, and you want to know your community well, by all means, again, go on with your bad self. That's one of my favorite sayings. But it does not have to look like that, okay? If this isn't your vision of homeschooling, that's okay. I too live in a city, and I don't want to know my bank teller. I don't want to know the name of my barista. I live in a city because I want freaking anonymity. Okay. Like, don't take that away from me just because I'm homeschooling. Like, I don't want people in my neighborhood to know who the hell I am. Thank you very much. And I realized that not everyone feels that way. And we create community, right? And he's in all kinds of things, and we know all kinds of people, and we are involved. But generally speaking, I want to walk down the street and not know people, and I don't want people to know my name. Okay. And that's okay. You can still homeschool effectively without becoming a first name basis with everyone in your neighborhood. Just
you
putting
would
that out there.
Positively die on my street. I mean, it is as old Southern Charleston as it gets, right? And literally one time, so Friday used to be like a busy day where, and listen, this is going to probably come across as unrelatable, but like on Fridays we had like services day, right? Like the person who comes to clean the pool came on Friday. The person who came to do this, it was always on Friday. I don't know why. I didn't organize it that way. It just kind of happened, right? And we have a lot of elderly people on our street, and so there's a lot of retirees. And literally one time my housekeeper texted me and said, so one of the girls on the team who works on the housekeeping team wasn't feeling well. They went into the house, and then she was sick to her stomach. And she was like, do you want me to drop her off and then come to you? I was like, no, I do not. Like, I was like, come on Monday. That's fine. As long as you're all healthy by Monday, like come on Monday. And one of my neighbors was literally like, no housekeeper today, huh? Like, I mean, that is the level of everyone knows everything about everyone sort of situation on this block. Everything. You would die here.
I would. And the thing is this is one of those weird times where like racial bias actually works to my benefit, because my husband loves to know people, right? Like he wants to know our neighbors. He's on a first name basis with a lot of them. He knows what cars they drive. He knows what their assigned parking spot is in our garage. We have over 260 units and over 400 parking spaces, and he knows who drives what car. I mean, like he is all in on all of it. But for better or worse, he is Asian, right? He is from Hong Kong, and a lot of people still don't assume that a white woman is married to an Asian man. So the vast majority of people in our community do not realize that we are married. And so I'm able to keep that level of anonymity. They must wonder where my husband is, right? Because it's shocking, right? Like,
well, and where do you think that you got your very Asian looking child from? Like,
I don't know, but I mean, like, I'm involved in our HOA association. I'm on the board, and I go to like crazy links, right? Like, if I get off the elevator and there are people watching me get off the elevator, I'll walk past my home and just keep going until the door has closed. Or like, if someone gets off the elevator with me, I'll do like loops around our floor until they've gone into their own home, so they don't know which unit I live in, right? Like, I mean, I really don't want you to know who I am or how to find me.
You
So
don't
yeah.
invite your grocer over for dinner if you've gotten like a really good squash at the grocery store.
Nope.
Okay.
Nope. I mean,
Fantastic.
I mean, frankly, I have my groceries delivered to my door from Amazon Fresh because, again, I live in the city and I can
You
do
can
that.
do that.
Yep.
Exactly.
And I don't have a full size grocery store anywhere close to us. You know, actually, we have to drive quite a ways. That's one of those, you know, urban city
Things,
living kind
yes.
of things. Yeah. Life looks different, and we're not in New York City where you have all these great like corner markets and stuff. So yeah.
Oh my gosh,
So
that's
yeah,
fantastic.
it can look different. It does not have to look like the picture she's painting here.
Well, but to the point earlier too, that's why you need to have your why, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because then you're going to get influenced by somebody who does, you know, bake cookies for their mailman on Thursdays and, you know, all that kind of stuff. And if you're like, "Oh, I'm not doing that." Okay, but that's not, it doesn't relate back to my purpose, my overall vision. So having
Mm-hmm.
those why statements or statement as you pointed out is super helpful. The next section is called Why Your Learning Space is Important. And listen, so there's a thing on page 13 that says what matters is that your child is involved in providing a vision for the space. And so yes and no from me, right? I am all about, I mean, hello, we're unschoolers, we're super child-led learning, right? But I think if you're just beginning your homeschooling journey and you say to your kid, what should our homeschool space look like? Whether your kid has been to school or not, they have been influenced about what school looks like, right? They've seen it in cartoons, they've seen it in books and, you know, graphics and books and things like that. And they're going to be like, well, we need a desk and we need a blackboard and we need this, right? And we've done an
Yeah.
episode on the fact that most homeschoolers don't do that thing. So I think, you know, when you're starting out, your kid probably doesn't even know what homeschooling is or what it should look like or what it might feel like or anything like that. And so, yes, I'm all about involving your kids and getting their opinion on stuff. But at the same time, they don't know anything more about homeschooling than you do at this point, right? I mean, maybe you've done the research and whatever, but, you know, and so they're likely going to default to those things. And that does not mean you should build a classroom, right? Like,
Yeah.
do not. I just read a post in my town's homeschool group, so as local as it gets. I spent $1,000 on curriculum and it's not working. We're only 2 weeks in and it's a total mess and I can't afford to get rid of it. Like, it took every ounce of me to be like, this is why veteran homeschoolers tell you not to buy curriculum. Like, we all say it over and over and over again, and no one listens. And then all these posts start popping up. So don't build a classroom. Don't spend $1,000 on curriculum. Just wait. Just see how it goes and ease in. It's not a race. No matter how old your kid is, it's not a race.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, and I think I agree with you, right? And it's that thing of like finding where you involve the kids. So if you've got a younger kiddo and you know, you're trying to figure it out for sure. Maybe you want a situation where they're sitting at a desk and working on things, or they're sitting at a table. Maybe you ask them, would you rather sit at the dining room table, or do you want me to put, you know, make a little desk space for you to sit to do this work? You know, like, or you know, they need a chair for they don't want to be at the dining room table with the regular stuff. They want a little desk. You know, like, what kind of chair do you want? Do you want one of these wobble stools? Do you want this kind of thing? You know, or maybe you're talking about reading time and they don't want to be on the couch, or you don't want to be in the living room for whatever reason. You know, like, do we want a bean bag or this kind of thing? Or, you know, like, you can have those kinds of conversations where you're giving them the input, right? Because everyone enjoys things much more when they actually have a say in it, right? If they're a stakeholder. But you can definitely lead that conversation. It does not have to just be like, hey, decorate our space.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, for me, that kind of like leads into my next comment, because you fast forward a couple pages on page 15, she's talking about, you know, like decorating the space and stuff like that, but also, well, actually, we have on the same, the initial comment is the same from both of us, right? But different takes on it again. And I think a lot of that has to do with how we're living and the environment that we're doing it in, right? Because you have the exact quote. She says, "Of course, we would all love to have an entire room within our house or apartment that could serve as a home classroom for our children." And I think, I could be wrong, but I think it's simply the fact that she used the word classroom and not something more loosey-goosey that turned you off. Am I right?
I just don't even believe in confining education to like one, like the whole house is the school. You know what I mean? The whole house
Mm-hmm.
is the learning environment. So even she has too, like an entire room within the house. So I have a thing. It's kind of a psychology thing that I don't think I explain very well, right? But like, I feel like when we create this thing where like, it's the beginning of the school year. I'm seeing all these things online about like, here's our schedule. What do you think? Right? School starts at 9 a.m. and it ends at whatever time, right? Okay. I think part of the issue that we have with culture in America and with kids not wanting to grow and not having a growth mindset and not being as curious as kids used to be is the fact that we require school from kids between X time and X time. And so after that ending time, they're like, I have done what you required of me. I have done that thing and now I am done and it's my time. I get to do what I want to, right? And because we've made the school requirement time rigid and structured and we didn't involve them and it wasn't fun and all of that kind of stuff, afterwards they go to the antithesis of what it is that we would want them to, because we've just made the other side of it so ugh, right? And so for me, I don't like the confines of learning in any way, right? I don't like having a schedule for learning in that way. Now, obviously, like my daughter starts her fall semester for college next week. And because of time zones, her classes are actually 7 p.m. to 11 p.m., right? So she has a time for school. Like, because it's an external class, obviously she can't be like, I show up when I show up, because we don't believe that, right? Like, okay, so like obviously that happens, but like for us, like we don't have like reading hour, we don't have, this, that, or the other thing, right? Because I've wanted learning to be very organic throughout. And so even the idea to me of having a designated space, because she talks about not just having a classroom, but having, she says, an entire room. And so for me, it's like, okay, well, I do the work in the room, but outside of the room, don't ask me to do anything because I did the thing in the room, right? And so I see kind of like this light switch, and I don't think it happens necessarily with your kid, probably because you have such a ravenous learner, right? Who loves information. But for people who struggle to get their kid, and it's like pulling teeth to get them to learn, I think creating those black and white divides between learning time and non-learning time, or learning space and non-learning space, enhances that problem.
Okay. So for me, I read that and I was like, holy crap, yes. I would love to have space, right? Like, I would love to have a space where all of the crap goes. We live in a 2-bedroom condo. We've talked about this, right? Technically, our condo has 3 rooms. There are 2 bedrooms and then one big, long, open space that has the kitchen with no divider. It has like kind of a low island counter that flows directly into the dining room, directly into the living room. And they're not large spaces, right? Like, you couldn't put a true full-size couch in our home unless you were willing to eat dinner on it all the time. Um, and so the reality is our homeschool stuff is everywhere. We have two closets in the bedrooms. They're small, and we have one teeny tiny closet that's in the main living space, and it has like the vacuum and some of our coats, but not all of our coats even fit in the coat closet, right? Like, it's that small that we have that little space. Our second bathroom was used primarily for storage. Now it's used for storage and podcasting, right? Like, this is our life. And I would love nothing more than to have an extra room that held all of my books and a bunch of the toys and had a shelf for all of the puzzles, right? As it is, the puzzles are in a stack on the living room floor, and the board games are kind of stacked next to it because we don't have room for any more bookshelves. We don't have room
Right.
for any more of that kind of stuff. And we don't have a closet to put it in, and we don't. And so it's just everywhere, right? And so I love living in the city. I love urban living, and there are trade-offs that we made, and I made those happily. I'm not complaining, generally speaking, but I absolutely had FOMO when he was younger. And I would see people talking about like, oh, our playroom, like we converted
Right.
our formal dining room into a playroom to hold all of the toys, as I'm like stumbling over toys, trying to get to the bathroom or trying to get out to the balcony because like the toys are everywhere. Cause there's, like there's
Yep.
only so much space in our home. So for me, I'm like, and maybe that's one of those things, the people in the small space, like, oh God, what I wouldn't do for another extra room to put some bookshelves and, like have a place to actually put things away. Like it's, because it's hard to be like minimalist, right? And really
Right.
pare down your stuff when you have kids in general. And then once you're homeschooling, right, you end up with the craft supplies and the educational games and the puzzles. And you're like, well, I don't really want, should I get rid of puzzles? It doesn't seem like we should just get rid of
Right.
puzzles. I mean, puzzles are great, but like also our puzzle shelf is very full. And so now there's a stack next to the puzzle shelf, like we only have one bookcase and it's got a shelf for puzzles and a shelf for board games and they're full because it's not very big. And so like, oh, there's so much stuff. I would like more space. Bottom line, I would like more space. I would take a room to put everything in and occasionally close the door and pretend like it's not a cluttered mess.
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah.
I, not so much. But yeah, my house setup is very different. I mean, we have outbuildings of storage. I mean, we couldn't have much more difference set up. So it'll be good. But
yeah, and I do think, right, like I know that your daughter has like up space that's just for her looms, right? Like her looms aren't in your living room. Whereas my kiddo hopes to be a Lego master and his Legos are in my living room.
Right.
Like, I would love for them to not be in my living room.
I do get that. Yes, I know. Yeah. I can totally see that. Yeah. Our very first house, which was meant to be our starter home, but then because of the 2007-2008 recession became our longer than starter home. And we had 3 kids there and we called it Tuna Can. That was the name of the house. Like, because there were 5 of us in there and it was like, so I get it. I've done the like IKEA thing where everything has to have a space and you have to like maximize every inch of storage space. Like I get it. I mean, we don't live there anymore, but yeah, I can relate. I understand because my kids were small then. So they had all the crap, and you had the swing and the living room and the bouncy seat and the, and a double stroller and this, that, and the other thing. It's like,
Yeah, no, for real. So. And then I will say kind of like the next step with that is, she was talking about having your kids help decorate the space and things like that. And I think, you can do that, but you don't have to do that. For us, we have a corner in our living room, which is where the little kind of desk is. And he sits and does like the online classes where he needs to be, present and he needs that kind of focus. I don't want a bunch of kids' artwork and, colorful posters and stuff in my living room. Like, yes, it's overrun with a bunch of toys and things like that, but I still like to try to generally have a grown-up living space. Your living space, if you are making homeschooling work in whatever environment, it does not have to look like your refrigerator threw up art projects just because you're embracing homeschool, right? Like you can create that space and it does not have to be it does not have to be a refrigerator of art projects exploded across your entire living space.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I'm the same. I visual clutter makes me really stressed. Like it really stresses me out, and so I would not like that. Okay, on 16, she does bring up a thing, though, about space, right? And she says a quiet space is especially important for students with ADHD or autism or a child who is more introverted or extremely sensitive. And we've done episodes about neurodiversity before. You can't say that all ADHD kids function the same way or thrive in the same environment. They're still individual humans, right? But I will say for my kid, this is true, right? He can only take a class in his room at his desk with his 2 monitors, with his bowls of fidget toys. Like everything has to, and it's not even so much about the noise. It's just like that feeling, that connection to his space, that he feels grounded there. He feels secure. He feels focused there because it's his space. But it does also have to be perfectly quiet. Like he, if we're goofing around in the hallway or something like that, or his brother and sister are goofing around in like a nearby bedroom or something and like being silly and giggling or whatever, we will hear from him. So there will be like a very Mary Poppins dressing down in the hallway of like, I am in math, right? So yes, that can be helpful. On the next page, there's a section about giving your child ownership that I loved, because it says ownership of their learning is one of the most important gifts you can give your child. Children need to know that learning is not something that happens only within the hours of 8 a.m. to 3 p.m., Monday through Friday at school. Instead, learning happens every day and everywhere. And I think, even in an environment where you might have more of a scheduled approach, that's still possible to instill with children, right? That they know that, oh, this afternoon, why don't we go check out that new market that opened, and you're going and you're looking at like new foods that you've never explored before and stuff like that, right? That it's all part of this kind of learning experience. And so kind of creating that culture, which I love.
Yeah, no, for sure. So for me, my next comment was on page 18, and she says, everything you need, you can buy used, and most necessary community resources, such as the park and library, are free. I just thought that's such a great reminder, right? It's easy to forget. And, we used to be foster parents, and we surrendered our license not that long ago. So we are clearing out a bunch of the baby stuff, right? My kid is 10. We have said, okay, we're not fostering babies anymore. We don't need 3 strollers, as it turns out, especially in the tiny space I was just describing, right? So as we have been doing that, it's that thing, we were talking about how often when it comes to stuff for our kids, so many people want to buy new. And there's this idea that you're not providing for them properly, or you can't provide for them properly if you're not buying new. And I mean, there are some things that you should buy new, right? And there are some things that have to be bought new, diapers, or, like there are things that you have to buy new for your kids, but there are a lot of things that you can buy used.
Oh, heck
and
yeah.
It just makes sense. And it's good for the environment. I mean, like there's so many options to buy used, and sometimes you can get free things like, curriculum exchanges. They'll be careful about that. A lot of times the curriculum exchange stuff is the less secular, less progressive stuff. So you have to tread a little bit more carefully there, but just that reminder, like used is fine. Like there are plenty of gently used things that are not grody. They're not, it's not like,
oh, I'm all about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And interestingly enough, because I have neurodivergent kids, my kids grew up wearing secondhand clothes. Like I would go to in Florida, we used to have these huge consignment sales that would be in like warehouses, right? Aisle after aisle after aisle. Those were my kids' favorite clothes. They were already broken in. They weren't scratchy, right? Yeah. My kids loved the stuff that came from those sales. So they were like, no complaints from us, This t-shirt's already been washed 50 times. I love it. I'm like, great, here you go.
Perfect. Yeah. Oh, funny.
All right. Chapter 3. What do you have?
Yeah. So chapter 3, develop your own teaching philosophy. So if you come from a teaching background, I can see how this might resonate, right? But after I read this entire chapter, I came back and put a note on the very first page, and it was literally just meh. Like, is this whole chapter even necessary? Right?
I thought we're going to get into them, but I thought the names that she gave them, I mean, I've been homeschooling for a really long time. You and I have been in book clubs together for forever. We've read so many books. Where did she get these names from? Like, I was just like,
I'm guessing teacher curriculum, right? Because that's what she does. She teaches she's a teaching professor, I guess.
Something or another.
Yeah, like the best way. Yeah, like I think maybe like a city college or something like that in New York. So that was my guess, that like these are, from true like teacher curriculum stuff, which is why they're not often used in the books we would pick up for book club.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I just made a note here, and it kind of goes with what I was saying before about like, not having confines around learning and things like that. And you brought it up. I forget if it was in this episode or the previous episode, but I know we've had a discussion recently about like, if your kid loves getting like a star on a paper or a smiley face on it, and like, that's their thing, like, go for it. Right. But sometimes I wonder too, like how much of that has been taught over time, that like, we're supposed to seek those things. Right. So at the very, very beginning of this, I think it was on page 1, where it talked about Page 1. One of the benefits of homeschooling was the increased intrinsic motivation to learn, right? And I think as a society in general, we've been so focused on extrinsic rewards and motivation, and they're just kind of super ick for me, right? Like there's a kind of this societal ranking that we put on our kids sometimes, right? When the reality is we can just learn because we love learning and because we love growing and because we love finding out new things and living a really well-developed life. And so there's a thing here about like the fact that her kid didn't even know what an A+ on a report card felt like, but he wanted to master the identification of rocks and minerals, right? And she always wanted him to have that feeling of competence and self-satisfaction. And so I love that. Like we talk about deschooling when you're new to homeschooling. And that to me is a huge part of it, right? Is kind of losing that carrot and stick mentality towards anything. It doesn't just have to be with education. It can be with chores. It can be with anything, right? It can be this whole thing like not everything has to be transactional, right? We don't need that thing. But she does break down these 4 learning styles in this chapter, right? So we'll just kind of run through them fairly quickly. Oh, sorry, were you going to say something?
No, I was just going to say, so I do hear where you're coming from. I will say on the flip side, I don't necessarily think that it's like there's a fundamental problem with that, like because we do tend to be more aggressive, academic kind of homeschoolers, like we are interested in things like the Junior Honor Society and things like that, of achieving those kinds of things. And I don't, yeah, it is similar to honor roll and the valedictorian, salutatorian things, but I don't necessarily think there's anything wrong with playing part of the game, right? Because that's the reality. It is part of
our resume builder.
Yeah, it is part of our society, and it's out there, and so if your kids have any interest in it, and this is not one of those push your kid who couldn't care less, but if you have a conversation with them and they're like, yeah, I'm interested in doing that, like I don't think there's anything wrong with supporting that and being aware of the fact that there is some extrinsic validation and motivation there, but life is full of that. There are lots of things in life that are extrinsically motivated. No one's going to work because it's like, oh, I want to spend my time in the office. I cannot wait.
I'm contributing to the common good.
Yeah. They're like, I'm going to use my paycheck to go on vacation. Right? Like most of us don't have a trust fund to be able to be like, I'm going to pass on the job. I'm just going to live this whatever. So, I don't necessarily, but there is a balance and it's, either way, and like, don't go all in, that thing, like you do not have to go all in, like you're in a brick and mortar school, but having some of it in your homeschool is fine. And going all the way over and having as little of it as possible because you're super unschooly and that's how you want to do it, that is also fine, right? There's a wide range in there that can work.
Mm-hmm. But I do agree with the resume building, right? I've talked about it in previous episodes, like, all my kids, I'm like, there will be no college debt. You will get scholarships. You will find your scholarships, right? And obviously we will contribute and we will help, right? But, there will be a piece of that. And so there has been a conversation for a while about, my daughter is an artist and, making sure that her work is being shown in places and things like that, because it will build her resume and help her get scholarships. So I do get that component of playing the game. Right. So yeah, I like that, your balance approach. All right. So the first of these philosophies that Amanda's like, what do we need these for, is, so we'll just kind of move through them quickly and give you a recap, right? So perennialism, which makes me think of flowers, right? Classic education, heavy on effort and planning, focuses a lot on reading, writing, math, history, and science. They're taught from basic to more advanced topics, a lot of direct teaching and analyzing texts together. So very text heavy, less curriculum and more learning through real books, right? Whether it's, biographies and, nonfiction and things like that. Low tech, inexpensive because you can get a bunch from the library, and super text heavy. So, if you're choosing a homeschool school style and you're like, that sounds amazing. Yeah. Is your kid a reader, right? Does your kid love to read? Does your kid process information quickly from reading? Does your kid struggle with reading? Are there learning disabilities at play? Is your kid dyslexic, right? All of that needs to come into play. I mean, my youngest kiddo is a strong reader, but his ADHD makes it almost impossible for him to read a physical book at this point, because you have to sit still to read a book. And that alone is such a struggle for him. He can listen to a book because he can listen to a book while he's rollerblading, while he's bouncing a ball, while he's bouncing on the trampoline, while he's riding his bike, but holding a physical book and sitting and reading it has become much harder over the years. So, when you're picking a style, you got to make sure it works for your kids too, right? Not just like the utopic school that you would like to design. And the really fun part, if you have multiple kids, is it might not be the same for all of them.
I would venture it's probably not the same
exactly.
for all of them, right? Like not even a might not be, like almost guaranteed to not work the same for all of them. Okay, so the next one is essentialism. And that is a focus on core subjects and basic skills. So you're doing a lot of subject-based learning and direct teaching. It's grade-based conceptual learning with scaffolding. And that's one of those like targeted words that you're going to hear a lot. And, oh, do you want mastery? Do we have scaffolding? Is there like, it may work for you. It may not. You may decide that you don't want to have anything to do with that because it's a very common thing, an idea in traditional schools. Scaffolding, it's not necessarily a bad thing, right? It's this idea of like helping support kids get to ideas. And a lot of kids benefit from scaffolding. If you have a gifted learner, they're probably not going to like a curriculum that has a lot of scaffolding because it tends to go slower and repeat things. They just want to get there. Yeah, exactly. There is a lot of structure in essentialism. There's a subject-based time schedule that's similar each day, right? So generally speaking, you're going to do math at 9 a.m. You're going to do ELA at 10 a.m., that kind of thing. So it's going to mimic a more traditional school day. You have assessments through projects, quizzes, and tests. I'm like, I think you could probably do essentialism without that much of a focused type of assessment, but it's low tech. So you're using a lot of textbooks and worksheets, workbooks, worksheets. And she says that it's especially good for people who are having to work with or around special learning or linguistic needs. And I think that's because you're doing textbooks and a lot of scaffolding. So maybe if English isn't your first language or that kind of stuff, it can be helpful. I can see that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. All right. Romanticism, the names, I'm telling you. Romanticism relies on intuition to teach emotional self-awareness, empowers students to fill their own educational needs, relies on the 5 I's, which are imagination, intuition, individuality, idealism, and inspiration. Parents provide an environmental context that supports their child's learning and development. Might appeal to gifted kids because they can go deep on topics of interest. This is probably the one that we ascribe to the most. I like it, but I've never heard it called romanticism in my life. So there you go.
That's it. It very much it reminded me of a college philosophy class that I had to take, right? And I did a political philosophy class as well, where like the way that the terms they put on it was like, no one actually calls it that, right? Like no one, but okay. Like, right. So educational philosophy 101. The 4th one that she has is progressivism. So teach students how to develop an individualized approach to task management, problem solving, and overcoming challenges. Learning happens in everyday life. Core subjects are usually done through group activities and co-ops, and like general family learning. There's the power of experimentation and trying things out in real world contexts. It's student centered. And she says, it can be high tech or low tech. And I would say based on the way that she described these, this is her preferred way of doing it, because she essentially said, this works for every learner. Any learner out there can do this. Whereas all of the other ones, she was like, this works for this, or this works for that, or this works for this one. She's like, this works for everyone. So I would say it's a safe assumption that she's pro-progressive.
Feel the slant. Yeah. There you go.
I have to say, reading these, I think like everything else, we do a mashup of kind of all of these, right? Like I don't understand, and that's part of my problem, right? I have never liked being like stuck in one specific box. Yeah. I don't want anyone to like really figure me out. Like we've got a problem if someone's got me figured out.
You're the one running around the corridors in your apartment building, hiding from people. So we got that. Okay. Like right. Your husband calls you like, I'm in the stairwell. I can't talk. I think 4C was near the elevator. Yeah.
Not even joking, unfortunately. Like, oh man,
I love it.
So yeah, I was not able to identify one specific one that we ascribe to. I will say,
because I felt some stuff in that progressivism too, right? Mm-hmm. And I think it's typical, where it's like a touch of this and a touch of that and a pinch of this,
Yeah, no, absolutely. There was one thing I wanted to highlight about the classical education. What did she call it? Perennialism. And that's classical education, which is, it's a thing, right? It's a very well established, and there are a lot of people who use classical education. And I do generally find it interesting to me and for me. And my kiddo is a reader. We've talked about that, right? Like 500 plus books a year, like devours books, physical books, ebooks, podcasts, Kindle books. I mean, like you just, if there's a way to devour a book, he will devour it. That said, I think you have to work really hard to make sure that classical education isn't totally whitewashed. And I'm not positive there's a way to actually truly decolonize classical education. So if that matters to you, and I'm not saying it has to, right? Like, but if that matters to you and you are really like, I want a completely decolonized education, I just do not think that you're going to be able to successfully do classical education that way.
Well, the ironic thing is, when I've heard other descriptions of educational styles that mimic that one, the perennialism / classical education, is I've mostly heard of it as Thomas Jefferson style education. So it's like super ironic that you say that, because you're like, okay, there you go, right? That's like there's a website called like TJ Ed Model or something like that, and it's all about Thomas Jefferson education philosophy, and like so there you go.
Yeah, I hadn't even heard of that. Like, because I have looked into classical education, and in fairness, our ELA curriculum does fall pretty in line with the classical education method, and it works for ELA. But I also put a lot of effort into making sure that the other books that we're reading have a lot more diversity, and it's not all just old white people and, white people throughout history, because in fairness, that's most of what we have easy access to, or what are considered the classics, right? Mm-hmm. A random small little plug. I thought this company had closed. I just realized they haven't. There's one called Culture and Curriculum, and they have great novel studies that are really interesting. I fully support checking it out. And so just that thing of like, if you want to use this classical education style because you have a reader and you like doing that, just be aware and make sure that you're not being a whitewashed asshole.
Always a good thing.
All right.
So on page 28, it's more about writing down your educational philosophy statement. And she gives a couple of examples here. So I wrote, this is and if you did this thing, I'm sorry, I'm not picking on you, right? So my thing, I said, this reminds me of people who write a 20-page birth plan and then it all goes to shit 5 minutes after your water breaks in the supermarket. Like, she has people sitting down and writing like this beautifully written, paragraph style statements about how they're going to homeschool. And I'm like, to me, that's like people who are like, when I have children, they will never use an iPad or eat a goldfish cracker and, all this kind of stuff, right? It's like all the like, here's what I'm going to do. And I'm like, to me, that's a lot of work to put into something when you're like, it's going to change. And that's not really like, you're saying, here's my vision for my homeschool path when you have no experience having homeschooled yet, right? So in my mind, I think the why statements are more important. Like, here's why I'm starting this, so that when I have moments of doubt or when I am not sure what to do and I'm at a crossroads and I'm trying to figure it out, let me go back to my why statements, because this thing is like, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. And you're going to write this like utopic model of education that odds are not amazing. That's the thing, right? So for me, I was like, meh, not really my jam.
Yeah. I mean, so I put down the quote specifically from the book is an education philosophy statement is a purposeful and reflective essay that breaks down a teacher's beliefs and practices. This statement becomes a helpful tool to begin with at the start of the school year and to look back on at the middle and end of the school year to see how your philosophy and ideas have changed once you put them into practice. Most educational philosophy statements are around 300 words and address such topics as the definition of education and learning, teaching expectations, and what the parent will do to create a positive learning environment for their child.
Are you going to publish yours, Amanda? Have you written yours and like from when you started and you're going to share it with the group? Like...
No, I do not have one of these. So that's my thing, right? Like we talk a lot about the fact that there are different ways of doing things. And I want to be mindful to whoever's listening, right? Meagan didn't do this and I didn't do this, but it might work for you, right? If this idea of sitting down and writing it out in a 5-paragraph essay format, because that helps you structure your ideas and get where you need to be or where you want to be, what makes you comfortable in doing it. Like
have the best time ever.
Yeah, do it. No one is telling that you can't. And to that end, she gives examples of it, right? She's got examples in here that you can read and it'll help you do it yourself if you want. But you don't have to do this, right? If writing it down helps, write it down. If writing it down as a 1-page white paper works, great. If you would rather put it on a bunch of Post-it notes so you can keep it handy, that's fine too. If it's just in your notes on your phone as you go through things and you think like, oh, I definitely want to remember this, like this is why, or like you read something and it's like, oh, this is a great like philosophy for how we want to homeschool in our family. And you put it in there in your phone so you can pull it up and remember when you're like, I'm having a really bad day and I can't remember why I decided to do this. Like, I'm going to go look at this. Like, that's fine too. It does not have to be a 300-word essay, whatever works for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally agree. All right. Well, we've got another 3 chapters coming up next week. Exciting times. If you would like to join us for a future book club episode, send us a DM. Come and chat books with us. You can join us in the studio. You can share your thoughts on the books and bounce back and forth. We'll even let you go into our secret document that Amanda and I keep and add your thoughts in so that we know what order to go in. You'll be one of us for the week. So just send us a 1 to 2 minute video letting us know why you want to join us in book club. It does not have to be formal or straight. Like, you don't have to put a bra on. It's all fine, right? Like, we are not those people. DM it to us through Facebook or Instagram. Let us know, and we're super excited to welcome you. But in the meantime, thanks so much for joining us today for the start of our new book, Good Times. We've got 2 more weeks with this book. I can't wait to see what's next. Tune in next week for a continuation of the discussion. And in the meantime, happy homeschooling.
Yeah, have a great one.